Brothers and sisters, citizens of Canada, Hawk Island, Montreal, North America, and worldwide, this is an emergency, crisis, war. Cup of coffee with Dragon, yours truly independent, activist, artist, and athlete, and to that, adding the fourth dimension of to the trinity of being a spiritual teacher and a student, of course, of spirituality. Before I proceed, I'm gonna let the light in. Let the light in, let the light in, let the light in. Pour yourself a cup of coffee. This is dedicated to the war, to the fight against the coronavirus. We're in this together, specifically calling on all to join the Corona Citizens Committee. I'm calling on I'm calling for the creation of a volunteer citizen army integrated with all public and private organizations, institutions to ensure secure food, housing, and transport, effective today if possible, if this is going online and the prime ministers and the powers that be hear this message, if not, as soon as possible, and specifically from April 1st to July 1st, specifically dedicated to my brothers and sisters on the front lines of this crisis, the health workers, doctors, nurses, locally here in Hawk Island, Montreal, Canada, Quebec, North America, and beyond. I am with you. This cup of coffee is for you. Yours truly, Adrian h.a.dragan, has not any symptoms of the three. If you do have any of the three symptoms, such as coughing, fever, and breathing difficulties, depending on the severities, do contact the number provided by your local authorities, health authorities. And if it is very severe, make the assessment to go to a clinic or to go to a hospital or take the measures necessary. To the soldiers, our soldiers, front lines, doctors and nurses, locally, nationally, internationally, to join the Citizen Corona Committee for the creation of the volunteer army in the coming days, weeks, and months ahead, and for healing, for healing, and for healing. I love you. Cheers. Before I proceed, this cup of coffee will be a reading session. I want to say that I will offer free citizen massages, hands washing, body washing, and feet washing, or total body washing, and hugs and kisses to all workers in the health industries, the health fields, doctors and nurses, which are our soldiers now on the front lines of this war against the coronavirus, of which myself, citizen, artist, athlete, activist, and spiritual teacher, am declaring a war upon today. For humanity, I'm calling on the erasure of the debt and our powers that be, financial powers especially, to mass finance my call for this creation of this army, citizen, volunteer, integrated army with all public and private sphere to ensure those three things, locally, nationally, internationally, for the new order of civilization and the survival of civilization. Food security, housing security, and transport security. Together we win. We'll have to apologize for this breach as an artist, writer, poet, choreographer, writer. I am going to breach a law perhaps by doing this, since I've not asked the rights, but I'm asking now, and I hope in this time of crisis it's granted that I be able to read from this book, which I've recovered from a free bookshelves while giving books and taking books away. It's called The Management of Working Capital in Hospitals. I think it is timely since this coronavirus has triggered a stock market crash and a subsequent financial panic, if you will, financial crisis as well. The Management of Working Capital. Free hugs for the writer Robert W. Broyles. If you hear me, Adrian h.a.dragan loves you. And I hope that you do understand that in these times, since are dedicated to the hospitals and for fight against the coronavirus, will not get problems by reading excerpts from this book which you wrote to Robert W. Broyles, The Management of Working Capital in Hospitals. Yours truly, Adrian H. Dragan, will now proceed from reading from it. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and we will read, learn together. This is again in solidarity with our soldiers on the front lines, health workers, doctors, nurses, to you. At the end of this, on Mount Royal again, I am offering free hugs, free citizen massages, free bathing, hand washing, feet washing to all our soldiers on the front lines of this war against the coronavirus, our brothers, my brothers and sisters, nurses, doctors, healthcare professionals. This one's to you specifically and generally to the fight of the war against the coronavirus and to support and come together as the formation locally, nationally, and internationally of citizen corona committees, which have check it out Facebook group, Citizen Corona Committee, calling on those three things by the formation, creation, institutionalization of a citizen volunteer army integrated with all public and private organizations, institutions, and interests. Yours truly. The Management of Working Capital. Robert W. Broyles, an Aspen publication. Published in 1981 in London. Table of Contents. Introduction. Introduction to Working Capital Management. The basic problem. The objective of management. A definition of working capital management. Relationship between working capital management and internal control. The value of working capital management. Two approaches in financing care. Financing hospital care in the U.S. So it seems that this is more in the U.S., our brothers and sisters down south, but it's also here, it says, in the United States and Canada, as has to do with hospitals, finance, working capital, hospitals in the United States and finance, hospitals in Canada and finance, financial management, economics, and hospital. The basic problem, the objective of management. These are the chapters. A definition of working capital management. Relationship between working capital management and internal control. The value of working capital management. Two approaches in financing care. Chapter 2. Financing hospital care in the U.S. Introduction, source of revenue, Blue Cross, the benefit package, allowable costs, financing hospital costs, methods of payment, the commercial insurance industry, the benefit structure, financing care under commercial insurance, methods of payment, Medicare, benefit structure, the management of working capital in hospitals, financing Medicare benefits, allowable costs, amount and receipt of Medicare payments, Medicaid. Chapter 3. Financing hospital care in Canada. Introduction, benefit structure and sources of revenue, inpatient benefits, outpatient benefits, other sources of revenue, allowable costs, financing mechanism, the federal contribution, the provincial contribution, methods of payment, summary and implications for working capital management, introduction to matrix algebra, introduction, that is chapter 4, a general description, matrix addition, matrix subtraction, matrix multiplication, the determinant and inverse of a matrix, working capital management. Chapter 5, fundamentals of working capital management, definitions, the importance of working capital management, working capital needs, a cash flow approach, working capital needs and financial statements, Financing working capital, nature of working capital, sources of funding, financing temporary working capital needs. This will be timely for our times. Choice of short-term finance, Appendix 5A. Chapter 6, Management of Accounts Receivable. Introduction, characteristics of accounts receivable, the cost of accounts receivable, the general case, opportunity costs, routine credit and collection costs, delinquency costs, advantages of trade credit, management and control of accounts receivable, the pre-admission phase, the admission phase, the production phase, the discharge phase, the post-discharge phase, evaluation of accounts receivable management, estimation of cash receipts, institutional sources, non-institutional sources, Appendix Chapter 7, Management of Cash. The functions of money, unit of value, medium of exchange, standard of deferred payment, store of value, the composition and importance of cash, the composition of cash, the importance of cash, the management and control of cash. Page General Guidelines. Page 156, an internal control system. Page 156, an internal control system. Page 156, an internal control system. That's interesting. The management of working capital in hospitals, evaluation of the control system, the cash balance decision, motives for holding cash, the cost of holding cash, elements of the cash balance decision, the nature of cash flows, the minimum cash balance, the cash balance under conditions of certainty, optimum cash balance and uncertainty, expected short cost function, expected long cost function, the optimum cash balance, management of marketable securities. Chapter 8, Management of Marketable Securities. Investment alternatives, government treasury bills, certificates of deposit, bonds, stocks, the evaluation of bonds, the process of stock selection, historical analysis, the forecasting phase, the analysis phase, a management model, the case of a single security, the basic model, an illustration, the portfolio problem, reduction of risk, marketability and liquidity, maturity, an investment strategy. Chapter 9, Inventory Management. The importance of inventories and inventory, and this is very timely because of course we know that inventory is now trying to be reshelved, and just yesterday I've read in the news that supposedly in 37 days Ontario, which is the biggest, most populated province in Canada, will run out of ICUs and ventilators in 37 days. So that has to do with this chapter specifically, would have to do correlated this chapter of inventory management. So yesterday was in the news that Ontario hospitals will run out of ICUs and ventilators in about approximately 37 days. So this has to do with the inventory. Will excuse me because I have to put the light on because it's getting dark. A storm is coming. So let's continue. Inventory management. Inventory management. The importance of inventories and inventory. Management function. The importance of inventories. Inventory management functions. The ABC classification system. The control of inventory. Costs of inventory. Ordering costs. Carrying costs. Long costs. Short costs. Inventory management. Certainty. Inventory management. Uncertainty. And this will be very, very timely since I've said, of course, that yesterday in the news was that in about 37 days, the Ontario hospitals will run out of ICUs, that is intensive care units. ICU stands for intensive care units, and ventilators. So these two types of inventory management, two chapters or two subchapters, if you will. There's two here. Inventory management, it doesn't say times, but it says certainty, and inventory management in times of uncertainty, or where we are now. The EQC and reorder point, uncertainty. The reorder point, a mathematical expectation model. Part 3, internal control. Chapter 10, cost analysis. Managerial uses of cost analysis. Planning operational activity. Controlling operational activity. Necessary prerequisites. Organization chart and chart of accounts. Classification of cost centers. Accurate accounting system. Information system. Methods of apportionment. Direct apportionment, step-down method, double distribution method, a comparison of the methods, alternate organizational structures, alternate methods of cost analysis, computer applications. Intro- Chapter 11, Introduction to Budgeting, budget. Budgeting and functions of management, planning, control, coordination, organizing techniques of budgeting. The global budget, line item budgeting, responsibility budgeting, program budgeting, zero-based budgeting, approaches to the budgeting process, comprehensive and partial budgets, fixed and flexible budgets, the budgeting process. Chapter 12, Introduction, phases of budget preparation, the first phase, the second phase, the third phase, the fourth phase. Chapter 13, Traditional budgeting techniques. Components of the budget, estimation of workload, the moving average and the geometric mean, exponential smoothing, regression analysis, expense budget, the salary and wage budget, supply expense budget, the revenue budget, standardized services, state-specific services measured by hours of use, merchandising function, the capital budget, cash receipts budget, cash disbursement budget, summary of cash receipts and disbursements. Chapter 14, Traditional systems of internal control and reporting, page 357. Basic principles of internal control, basic statistical reports, work performance reports, cost variances, a summary view, reporting revenues and expenses. Chapter 15, Program budgeting. Introduction to program area, the components of hospital care, an overview of the operational budget of the program area, the size of the patient population, the expected diagnostic mix, service requirements of the program area, estimation of resource requirements, labor and supply costs of the program area, standard factor prices, labor costs, supply costs, overhead and direct equipment costs of program areas, full program costs, obtaining the data. Chapter 16, Responsibility budgeting. Introduction, operational budget of the Responsibility Center, financial budget of the Responsibility Center, financial budget for Department D, financial budget for Departments D1 and D2, equipment and overhead costs of the Responsibility Center, full cost of operation, rate setting, costs, direct costs. Indirect or overhead costs, full cost pricing. Chapter 17, Controlling the Program Area. Introduction and overview of the reporting system, the total cost variance, diagnostic mix variance, service mix variance, labor efficiency variance, supply efficiency variance, wage variance, supply price variance, management reports. Controlling the Responsibility Center. Chapter 18. The total cost variance, volume variance, efficiency variance, price variance, the interactive variance, management reports, productivity reports. Chapter 19, Short-term forecasting, introduction, forecasting techniques, time series analysis, regression analysis, causal models, regression analysis, and simulation, and the index at the end for page 485. Health. We'll read the preface and the introduction, and then we'll go to the Financing Hospital Care in Canada, Chapter 3. Ready? Set. Preface. The The purpose of this text is to familiarize practicing administrator and students of healthcare administration with the fundamentals of working capital, with the fundamentals of working capital, working capital management and the techniques of controlling operational activity, particularly in achieving the goals and objectives of the hospital enterprise. So this will be, for example, in the case that I've said that the Ontario will report that the hospitals will run out of ICU, that is intensive care units, in approximately 37 days. So this would be something that would be relevant. Accordingly, this book is comprised of three parts. The first phase discusses the financial environment of the institution and examines methods that have been used in the United States and Canada together, Canadians and Americans. We have North America, the Americas, and we have one world. Methods that have been used in the United States and Canada to finance hospital care. As documented in Part 1, the two countries have relied in varying degrees on prospective and retrospective methods of financing the cost of care. I'm making a call now to my brothers and sisters who are blessed as athletes, as activists, who have millions, who have tens of millions, some have hundreds of millions, to finance, to inject some of your capital into the hospitals right now, starting now. If you hear this, when you hear this, if anybody hears this, please make this call to our blessed artists. I'm not going to name names, which are so blessed by our societies. Just the other day was so a bit infuriated that the NFL was a player, and I love football. The players was offered a $70 million contract for 5 years. That's 12 million a year for 18 games, if 16 games. If you make it to play the playoffs, maximum 20 games, 19 to run a ball. So I was outraged. So you can, and please do it. We've been so blessed by our societies. Hockey players, Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, NBA, so blessed by our society since 1984. They've become millionaires by the sports and entertainment, while the workers, of course, workers' wages have stagnated. As myself remember working retail for a few years. I was a worker on the front lines during the great financial crisis of 2007-2010. My work hours got cut 3 times during just a year, maybe less, maybe 11 months. Once they got cut, a few months later, another time, then another time, 2008. Nobody came to help me, struggling with that plans to make a doctorate, not a doctor, medicinal, but a doctorate in politics, in finance, in history. Plans change. Didn't have no family support. Came from a poor background, single parent background. Nobody to finance me. Nobody helped me. Anyways, this is about us. It's about us. It's about us now. How we're gonna change, take this opportunity, this war, this crisis, to become better ourselves, less selfish, more caring, more loving. I'm offering kisses, hugs to all mankind. Here is the project I've started working on. 7.7 billion hug project. Love it, finance it, support it. But we gotta get through this first, and we will. As a result, the techniques of working capital management as developed here accommodate both mechanisms. Many techniques are expressed in the notation of matrix algebra. Algebra, ABC, power 2, parentheses, yeah, algebra. Matrix algebra not only simplifies the expression of complex mathematical operations, but also provides the basis for developing programs that permit management to use high-speed electronic computers to perform calculations. I'm going to read this again. Matrix algebra not only simplifies the expression of complex mathematical operations, but also provides the basis for developing programs that permit management to use high-speed electronic computers to perform calculations. Matrix algebra not only simplifies the expression of complex mathematical operations, but also provides the basis for developing programs that permit management to use high-speed electronic computers to perform calculations. Bless computers, kiss them. I'm gonna kiss this one, which was gifted to me. And again, I have to say now that before I forget, I gotta thank the one I call my sister and was a friend, longtime friend, and oftentimes teacher for providing yours truly, Adrian h.a.dragan, independent citizen, athlete, activist, artist, and to that trinity adding the dimension of being a universal spiritual teacher. She provided this coffee, financing this cup of coffee. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had this coffee in this time since I'm financially rock bottom. May she be blessed 77 for all. Matrix algebra not only simplifies the expression of complex mathematical operations, but also provides the basis for developing programs that permit management to use high-speed electronic computers to perform the calculations. Since many readers may not be familiar with this area of mathematics, Chapter 4 is devoted to a discussion of the fundamentals of matrix algebra. In Part 2 of this book, Chapter 5 addresses the fundamentals of working capital management. Hey? Oh, close the window? Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh, yeah. Chapter 6, the principles of managing outstanding receivables. Chapter 7, cash management. Chapter 9, managing the hospital's investment in marketable securities. And Chapter 9, inventory management. And right now, this would be the relevant, most timely, the inventory management. Perhaps we'll take a look at it today, or if not, another time. While the retrospective system of financing hospital care predominates in the United States, and the prospective mechanism in Canada, elements of these systems are present in both countries. To accommodate both methods of reimbursement, separate models are developed in selected sections of this text. Since one of the most important aspects of working capital is the control and evaluation of the hospital's day-to-day functioning, the final section of this volume, Part 3, discusses the techniques that may be used in monitoring, evaluating, and controlling the institution's operational activity. In discharging these responsibilities, managers must develop indexes of current activity as well as a standard against which actual operational performance is compared. Data to carry out these functions are obtainable through the application of cost-finding techniques. Cost-finding is a method by which management may determine the actual or expected expenditures in operating units that provide direct patient care and thereby earn revenue for the hospital. Accordingly, Chapter 10 Accordingly, Chapter 10 examines cost analysis as a system by which management may derive the data required for such activities as 1. The prospective development of the hospital's rate structure. 2. The preparation of the revenue budget. 3. The construction of indexes that reflect current operational activity. Following the discussion of cost finding are chapters on the process and techniques of budgeting. These provide a frame of reference for understanding the budgeting process as well as the techniques that may be used in developing a budget in which expectations concerning desired performance are expressed in real monetary terms. This section also examines a system of internal reporting and control based on indexes of current operational activity and standards of performance as expressed by the budget. The discussion analyzes exceptions to the budget that facilitates identification of areas that require remedial actions or policies in order to control or realign current operational activity. And I'm going to read this again because this, for example, with the supposed ICU crises or lack of ICUs after 37 days that was reported yesterday in Ontario, and of course such as masks and gloves and masks, and with other hospital goods. Other hospital goods, of course, are this is very, very, very timely, and this is what's happening now and what should happen. The discussion analyzes exceptions to the budget. So this exception would be this current crisis that we're undergoing now. This is the exception. The coronavirus, the war against the coronavirus. This is the exception. That's why I'm making a call to all for millionaires to inject their wealth now. Now, today, March 20. What can I give? Can donate. You know, I'm owning much stuff. Can donate. I'm gonna donate this to the first one who gives $1 billion to the healthcare system. This in the United States or United States of America. So donate. If you're a billionaire, you are Mr. or Mrs. Bill Gates's, or from the Thompson family here in Canada, or hockey players, multimillionaires, NBA players, multimillionaires, NFL. My favorite team is San Francisco 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo, you made supposedly the best deal. Supposedly the Jimmy Garoppolo, my favorite player in the NFL since I'm a 49er fan, is the best paid athlete ever, I think, or something like that. Fact check me, I'm not sure, but for a 5-year contract, I think 156 million, which is about 30 something million per year. 31 million if I'm not correct, or it could be 37. 37? 37 maybe. Anyways, so to you, together pool funds, and I'm gonna donate to you, and we're gonna write the names here in the back to all who small if there's a lot. So pull together resources. I'm gonna donate this, which was gifted to me some time ago. Yep, there we go. A great, 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 great grandfather. So yeah, cheers. The discussion analyzes exceptions to the budget that facilitates identification of areas that require remedial action. So this would be now in this time would be the gloves, the disinfectants, the masks, and so on. Although the masks, I'm referring to healthcare professionals specifically, since we know that in this coronavirus crisis, the masks are not effective. Washing hands with soap, please do right now. Take a moment. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna pause. You can come back. Wash your hands. Just go. You got 37 seconds. So now that you washed your hands, I'm going to read this again. The discussion analyzes exceptions to the budget that facilitate identification of areas that require remedial actions or policies in order to control or realign current operating activities. So this would be to realign now. So actions or policies. Again, I'm calling policies to be injected by our millionaires blessed into the healthcare system now billions of dollars. Policies, this would be a policy, increase the budget would be a policy. The policy would be a quarantine, isolation, and the changing policies that are related to this crisis now, and realignment, of course, the current operating activity. The final chapter is a general discussion of various approaches to the development of short-term projections, as well as the role of forecast in managing working capital and in formulating the plans by which the administration expects to achieve the goals of the hospital enterprise. Robert W. Broyles, Ottawa, Ontario, March 1981. March. So we are in March, March 20 equinox. Happy equinox. This was in Ottawa, Ontario, not far from here, March 1981. So almost 30 years ago, but of course the fundamentals haven't changed. What I've read is as applicable today as it was back in ancient Egypt when Joseph saved the world. Acknowledgements. Because I will read this. The author is indebted to a number of contributors whose suggestions have resulted in a far better product than would have been possible otherwise. Particular gratitude is expressed to Colin Lay, who provided valuable insights and recommendations for an improved presentation. The author also is indebted to George Hamilton and J.A. Kendry of the Canadian Ministry of Health for their helpful comments. In addition, the suggestions and recommendations provided by those who reviewed this manuscript are gratefully acknowledged. The author also wishes to extend sincere gratitude to Micheline Leblanc for her dedication and the effort required in the preparation of this text. In addition, the efforts of Mike Brown, Margaret Raphael, Ellen Higgins, and Sam Sharkey are gratefully acknowledged. Finally, no endeavor such as this would have been possible without the support and encouragement of my family, Rita and Aaron. Recognizing the contribution of others, the responsibility for any errors or oversights must rest with the author. We will continue. This is your truly independent artist, activist, and athlete, Adrian h.a.dragan, also universal spiritual teacher, with this reading session, meditative session, proposition session, specifically dedicated once again to my brothers and sisters, the soldiers on the front lines of this war against the coronavirus, our doctors, healthcare professionals, nurses to whom I offer with love and gratitude on Mount Royal once we've vanquished this enemy, and we will together. Free hugs, free hand washings, free feet massaging for a bit of pleasure and recreational activity, massages and wherever, head to toe, or head or toes or whatever they want, and the feet, kisses, deep hugs to them on Mount Royal once this is done. Yours truly, to love. Chapter 1. We will be reading Chapter 1 and we will be going up to the hospital. We will be skipping hospital care in the US, not because this is both for US and Canada, but because I'm in Canada. I'm a Canadian, although I'm a North American citizen. I'm also a citizen of the world, an LGBTQ citizen, but because I'm here in Hawk Island, also known as Montreal, and am Canadian. As much as I'm a North American citizen and a world citizen, I am Canadian. Chapter 1. Introduction to Working Capital Management. Objectives. After completing this chapter, you should be able to 1. Identify the objectives of the hospital enterprise. 2. Understand the basic components of working capital management. 3. Understand the interrelationship among the components of working capital management. Understand the importance of working capital management to achieving the goals of the hospital enterprise. I'm going to read those again. So after completing this chapter, you should be able to identify the objectives of the hospital enterprise. Understand the basic components of working capital management. Understand the interrelationship among the components of working capital management. Understand the importance of working capital management to achieving the goals of the hospital enterprise. One more time. Objectives. After completing this chapter, you should be able to identify the objectives of the hospital enterprise, understand the basic components of working capital management, and 3. Understand the interrelationship among the components of working capital management, and 4. Understand the importance of working capital management to achieving the goals of the hospital enterprise. So, for example, the goals would be to have maximum capacity, and etc., 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 etc. As now most are focused on the COVID-19, the coronavirus crisis. 1.1. The basic problem that the cost of medical care in the United States and Canada have risen at unprecedented rates in recent years requires no documentation. Funny, it's not funny really, but this is what happened at least since the Great Depression again. The Great Recession, that is, not the Great Depression, my bad. The Great Recession from 2007 to 2010, which some financial analysts say that a lot of the world was still in recovery from that up to November last year or so, February last year. Now with the coronavirus triggering a stock market crash and financial crises, it's also good to note. In response to this rapid escalation, governmental authorities and other entities responsible for financing health care have intensified efforts to reduce the total cost of providing health services or to abate the rate at which those costs have risen. Since expenditures have increased more rapidly for hospital care than for any other form of medical care, administrators have been subjected to even greater pressure to contain costs and to improve the efficiency of their operations. In such an economic environment, it's timely today as it was almost 81, almost 30 years ago. It's actually it's March 81, so exactly 37 years ago. Written 81. No, 39 years ago. 39 years ago. 39. Yeah. Still very timely. Since expenditures have increased more rapidly for hospital care than for any other form of medical care, administrators have been subjected to even greater pressure to contain costs and to improve the efficiency of their operations. In such an economic environment, the problems usually associated with working capital management, as well as with monitoring, evaluating, and controlling operational activity, have become even more crucial. In recent years, the importance of working capital management as an integral part of operational management has become increasingly recognized. Indeed, it is difficult, if not impossible, to conceive of an operational decision that does not have a financial ramification. Given the increased pressure for economic efficiency and cost containment, containment. The importance of managing the working capital of the hospital and controlling operational activity in an effective and efficient manner cannot be denied. The purpose of the following discussion is to outline the importance of working capital management and internal control when viewed from the perspective of achieving the goals of the hospital enterprise. However, it is necessary first to specify management goals and to define working capital management. The objectives of management. To identify the basic objectives of the management, assume that the supply of hospital services in a given area is not excessive and that the continued existence of the institution is required to provide an adequate level of health services to the population is at risk, which is the case today. Under this assumption, it may be argued that management's objective is to ensure the continued existence of the institution so as to provide the services required in meeting the community's health needs. Clearly, then, one management objective is to ensure that total revenues are at least equal to total costs. In turn, that tends to assure the continued existence of the institution. Such an objective, while pragmatic and realistic, fails to reflect the economic realities that confront the administrator. As a result, the definition of management's objective function must be modified and expanded. Obviously, the goal of ensuring the quality of total revenues and total cost, is far too restrictive. The increasing demands for healthcare, coupled with improvements in medical technology that become embodied in hospital capital, plus the impact of inflation, require that the institution earn revenues in excess of costs so as to maintain the productive capability necessary for providing service. Thus, even though the non-profit status of the average hospital requires that total revenues only equal total costs, the environment in which such an institution operates dictates that revenues in excess of costs must be earned if it is to discharge its service responsibility. As noted, the rapid escalation in the cost of healthcare has resulted in increased demands for cost containment should be put now. An economic restraint should be in place now. An economic restraint. Given this economic reality, it also is necessary to reflect the goal of cost containment in specifying the objectives associated with the average short-term hospital. These considerations suggest that the objectives of management might be modified and expanded as follows. In the case of the hospital, the objective may be defined as preserving its long-run and short-run financial viability, as well as its productive capability so as to provide required services to the community at an acceptable level of quality and at minimum cost. 1.3 A definition of working capital management. Working capital is a term commonly employed to represent the current assets of an institution. It includes items that appear in the current asset portion of the balance sheet. As a consequence, the institution's investment in accounts receivable, cash, inventories, and marketable securities represent the lion's share, the lion's share of the current assets held by most acute care hospitals. Since one of the objectives is to provide required services at minimum cost, management must ensure that the use of the hospital current assets is planned, controlled, and coordinated so as to minimize the cost of operation. Management also must be concerned with the methods by which working capital assets are financed. Management frequently is confronted with numerous sources of either long-term or short-term financing. Obviously, if services are to be provided at least cost, management must select the funding method that minimizes the expense of financing current assets, an integral component of working capital management. As a consequence, working capital management involves the administration not only of the hospital's current assets, but also of the liabilities it frequently incurs when those resources are required. The problem of controlling operational activity will be expressed in both real and financial terms. Because most operational decisions exert an impact on one or more components of working capital, it is imperative to recognize the interrelationship between the operational and financial spheres of activity in the hospital. Relationship between working capital management and internal control. This section examines the relation between working capital management and the process of planning, monitoring, evaluating, and controlling operational activity, as expressed in real or physical terms. In fact, the hospital's operational activity is central to the problem of managing its current assets and liabilities. Operational activity is represented by the combination of factor inputs, that is, land, labor, capital equipment, and consumable supplies. Land, Operational activity is represented by the combination of factor inputs: land, labor, capital equipment, and consumable supplies. Operational activity is represented by the combination of factor inputs: land, labor, capital equipment, and consumable supplies in a production process that results in providing hospital care. Obviously, the provision of patient care during a given time interval generates revenues and expenses from which the net income or loss for the period can be determined. When the hospital is reimbursed retrospectively, the generation of income simultaneously creates an account receivable that represents a sum of money that is owed to the hospital by the patient or a third party payer. In many situations, the generation of revenue is related closely to one of the major components of working capital, namely the accounts receivable of the institution. And now this is a graph where we can see of the institution where we can see relationship between the components of working capital management. I'm just going to read them. So I'm going to start by reading the inventory. So what we have: inventory, then factor inputs, production process, hospital services, revenue, expenses, liabilities, capital acquisitions, then revenue goes to accounts receivable, net income or loss, prospective payments and cash sales, cash inflows, that is incoming, beginning, then you have liabilities, cash outflows, goes beginning, cash balance, excess cash, investment in marketable securities. So inventory, factor inputs, production process, hospital services, revenue, then expenses, liabilities, capital acquisitions, net income or loss, cash outflows, account receivable, cash inflows, prospective payments and cash sales, beginning cash balance, excess cash, investment in marketable securities. So from the inventory, factor inputs, liabilities, expenses, capital acquisitions, production process, hospital services, revenue, net income or loss, cash outflows, accounts receivable, cash inflows, beginning cash balance, prospective payments and cash sales, excess cash, investment in marketable securities. Outstanding receivables also are related closely to the cash inflows of the institution. In this case, the realization of receivables represent a, represents a major source of cash to the hospital. In addition to the payments made on outstanding receivables, the hospital can receive cash in the form of prepayment from a third party or a patient, as well as payments that occur more or less simultaneously with the provision of service. The next consideration involves the hospital's cash disbursements. Unlike cash receipts, a cash disbursement usually terminates a direct market transaction in which the hospital acquires needed goods or services. For example, it is common for the hospital to require resources by issuing either long-term or short-term debt instrument. However, the liquidation of the resulting liability ultimately requires a cash disbursement by the hospital, as Figure 1.1 shows. The liabilities of the hospital represent one of the major mechanisms by which current assets are financed. At this point, it should be noted that the cash available to the institution during a given period is simply the sum of the initial cash balance and the amount of cash received through prospective payments, the realization of outstanding receivables and cash sales, cash receipts, cash disbursements, and the cash balance all are major elements of cash management, which is one of the basic components of working capital management. Closely, closely related to the management of cash is the problem of managing the institution's investment in marketable securities, also a component of working capital management. For example, in a world of certainty, the initial cash balance coupled with cash receipts represent the amount of cash available. Subtracting cash disbursements from available cash yields a sum of money that may be invested in marketable securities that earn interest income for the institution. As a result, the management of cash and the institution's investment in marketable securities are closely interrelated activities that belong to the domain of working capital management. Finally, it is important to recognize that consumable supplies, when held in inventory, are regarded current asset as a current asset of the institution. As a result, the process of acquiring and holding an adequate supply of inventory represents one of the most important problems of working capital management. The value of working capital management. As an example of the value of working capital management in achieving the goal of providing required services at minimum cost, consider the problem of managing the current assets of the hospital. To begin such a discussion, the output of the hospital during some specified period of time may be defined as the provision of diagnostic, therapeutic, and support services required in the medical management of a given number of patients. Obviously, these services require the use of labor, capital equipment, and consumable supplies. Recognizing that cash is the universal vehicle by which such resources are acquired, it is clear that cash management plays an integral role in the process by which required services are provided to the patient population. On the one hand, frequent cash shortages may jeopardize the hospital's ability to acquire the resources it needs to provide service. Moreover, should a hospital encounter frequent cash shortages, it incurs financial costs, which may take the form of a deteriorating credit rating or interest charges that must be paid to obtain a short-term loan. And that's a problem. I'm calling for abrogation of all interest charges for 3 months, starting today, hopefully March 20th, if not April 1st, July. Consequently, the frequent cash shortages may result in disruptions in the process by which care is provided, as well as give rise to additional financial costs. On the other hand, idle cash earns nothing for the hospital. Indeed, during periods of inflation, excess funds that remain in idle cash balances earn a negative return, an opportunity cost that is equal to the rate of return that could have been earned by investing the funds in an interest-bearing security. Thus, if management is to achieve the goal of providing required services at minimum costs, these considerations suggest that neither too little nor too much cash should be on hand at any given time. Techniques such as cash forecasting, cash budgeting, and probability models of cash management can provide the administrator with the information and the frame of reference with which to reach decisions concerning the desired cash balance. As noted, the hospital's cash receipts depend on the rate at which outstanding receivables are converted into cash. As a result, patient care depends, by indirection, on the effectiveness with which accounts receivable are managed. The management of these receivables is a purely financial area of activity, and such can be managed at least cost. As will be seen later, one of the primary objectives in managing outstanding receivables is to accelerate the rate at which these accounts are transformed into cash. When applied appropriately, the techniques of working capital management are of considerable value in achieving this goal. Closely related to receivables and the cash balance are decisions concerning the hospital's investment in interest-earning securities. To avoid both the opportunity costs described earlier and the reduction in the purchasing power of cash that results from increase in factor prices, this is economics 101. Management must ensure that excess funds are invested in an alternative that earns income for the hospital. Competent decisions concerning the level and composition of the hospital's investment in marketable securities can improve the institution's financial position significantly. Techniques of working capital management, such as present value analysis, internal rates of return, and the intrinsic value approach to evaluating investment alternatives, can be of real value when reaching decisions concerning the hospital portfolio. As mentioned, patient service requires the use of consumable supplies, and if disruptions in the process of providing care are to be avoided. So in this situation of the war against the coronavirus, consumable supplies, of course, can vary, and it is very relevant. And if disruption in the process of providing care are to be avoided, management must contain an adequate inventory. I would say that now in this time of crisis, the inventory has to be, say, made up, so to have a little bit of surplus or to be balanced. When the hospital acquires and possesses inventory, it incurs costs, and if they are to be minimized, considerable time and effort must be devoted to inventory management. Of considerable value in coping with inventory management problems are the financial techniques of economic order, quantity, buffer or safety stocks, and probability models. So, for example, probability model in this case, like they did for Ontario, who predicted that they're going to run out of ICUs, that is intensive care units, and ventilators in about 37 days. So that's one of it. So of considerable value in coping with inventory management problems are the financial techniques of economic order quantity, buffer or safety stocks, and probability models. As will be seen, the appropriate application of these techniques can provide the information and the basis on which management can reach inventory decisions that minimize the cost of holding adequate stocks of consumable supplies, as will be seen. So, of considerable value in coping with inventory management problems are the financial techniques of economic order, quantity, buffer or safety stocks, and probability models. As will be seen, the appropriate application of these techniques can provide the information and the basis on which management can reach inventory decisions that minimize the cost of holding adequate stocks of consumable supplies. One of the primary goals of management is to ensure the financial viability of the hospital, which implies that in the long run revenues must be equal to or greater than total costs of operation, since the amount of reimbursement from governmental authorities and other third-party payers, and again, this is where I'm going to make the call again to our more financially blessed members of our society, especially athletes who are millionaires because of playing different sports in the NHL, NBA, NFL, and of course artists who are blessed millionaires, multimillionaires. Please be that third party to finance the operating costs of the hospitals at this time of need. Sign those checks. My check is hugs, massages to be collected after we win this war on Mount Royal. Citizen massages. Third party prayers frequently is related to the cost of providing care. Management must accurately, since the amount of reimbursement from governmental authorities and other third party payers frequently is related to the cost of providing care. Management must determine accurately the full cost of producing those pardon, pardon, services that earn revenue for the hospital. Thus, management must allocate the costs of operating the departments or cost centers that offer general support to the department that provides services that earn revenue for the hospital. Once the costs of providing support services have been allocated, management may use the resulting data to establish or revise the hospital's rate structure. Given that the major part of revenue is derived through the provision of patient services, the rate structure must reflect both the direct and indirect costs of operation, as well as the costs of capital if management is to ensure the equality between total revenues and total expenditures. The method frequently used to derive the data for the development of such a rate structure is the technique of cost finding or cost analysis. Cost finding techniques, when coupled with standards of performance, also are of value to the administrator when monitoring, controlling, and evaluating current operations. At the heart of any system by which internal operations are controlled and evaluated is a standard that expresses the institution's desired or expected performance. As such, the standard constitutes the basis against which actual performance may be compared, monitored, and controlled. Such comparisons are of value in identifying areas of hospital operations in which actual performance has deviated from the desired or expected performance. On the basis of this information, management may take corrective action to realign the results of actual operational activity with the desired standard of performance. The standard against which actual operational activity is compared usually is expressed by the hospital budget. When coupled with indicators of actual performance, the budget plays a central role in the process by which operational activity is monitored, evaluated, and controlled. As will be discussed in more detail later, the operating budget of the hospital is composed of a revenue budget and an expense budget. The expense budget usually is an expression of the costs management expects to incur in providing service. Once the expense budget for each department has been developed, management may use cost finding techniques to estimate the full expense of providing services for which the hospital earns revenue. Management then is in a position to determine the rate structure that is expected to prevail during the budget period, which provides the basis for the development of the revenue budget. The components of the operating budget represent the standard against which actual costs and revenues can be compared. A comparison of actual costs with expected costs may identify areas of operational activity in which management must take corrective action so as to achieve its goal of containing costs. Similarly, a comparison of actual costs with expected revenues provides management with the information it requires when assessing the extent to which the goal of maintaining equality between total revenues and expenses is being achieved. As a result, cost finding and budgeting are techniques that may be used productively in monitoring, evaluating, and controlling current performance as well as in assuring that total revenues are equal to or greater than total costs. This section has emphasized working capital management rather than accounting. The difference between accounting and the financial management of working capital is critical and must be clear to avoid misunderstanding in the remaining chapters. Accounting may be defined as the art of recording, summarizing, reporting, and interpreting financial information concerning the economic enterprise. I'm going to read that again, that's important. Accounting may be defined as the art of recording, summarizing, reporting, or interpreting financial information concerning the economic enterprise. Accounting may be defined as the art of recording, summarizing, reporting, or, and interpreting financial information concerning the economic enterprise. The earlier definition suggested that working capital management focuses on the problem of financing required resources at least cost, as well as ensuring that these resources were used efficiently and effectively once they had been acquired. These considerations suggest that working capital management and accounting are closely related but are separate functions that must be performed efficiently and accurately if the objectives of the healthcare enterprise are to be achieved. As described previously, working capital management may be viewed as the application of a set of tools and techniques in a decision-making process that uses the information generated by the accounting system. The accounting system performs a basic informational function that provides much of the data required when applying those tools and techniques. Working capital management, then, is the use of accounting information to improve the operational and financial activities of the institution. Two approaches in financing care. That competent working capital management is conducive to the efficient operation of a hospital should be clear from this discussion. The application of the tools and techniques of working capital management depends to a significant extent on the financial environment of the hospital. For example, the relative importance and management of such assets as cash and accounts receivable depend on the method used to finance the costs of hospital care. Essentially, two approaches to the problem of financing the costs of hospital care can be identified. One, used extensively in the United States. The first is characterized as retrospective in that payment normally is received after service has been provided. Two, predominant in Canada. The second is regarded as a prospective system since payment usually is received before service is provided. Since an understanding of when and how to apply the tools and techniques of working capital management depends on the external financial environment, the next two chapters describe the methods by which hospital care is financed in the United States and Canada. Financing hospital care in the US, chapter 2. We're just going to read the introduction and then we'll and the chapters and we'll go directly to the Canadian one. Objectives. Identify the major third-party payers in the United States. Describe the basic benefit packages offered by third-party payers. Describe the costs recoverable from Blue Cross and Medicare. Describe the methods used by third parties to finance the costs of hospital care. Third parties, my brothers and sisters, now I'm calling upon you to be that third party. Jimmy Garoppolo, you're my favorite sports figure, but you have been blessed with a contract so many millions, give at least 10%. Of 130 million, just 13 million, 0.4 of the 156 or whatever it is, 10%. My brothers and sisters, NFL and HL, who have millions already, be that third party, finance it. Introduction. One of the most important factors that influences the management of working capital is the method by which hospital costs are financed. As is explained, essentially the two methods are used in the United States to finance hospital care: retrospective and prospective payment. In the first technique, public or private payers reimburse the healthcare institution for services provided previously, and payers assume financial responsibility for the costs actually incurred by the hospital. Chapter: Sources of Revenue. The average hospital in the United States relies on third-party payers. Jimmy Garoppolo, you be the first third-party payer, give 10%. Your number one fan is calling me. I love you. I do love you. I love you. Third party is its major source of revenue and cash. A third party payer may be defined as any agent other than the patient who agrees to assume the financial responsibility for the hospital bill of the individual receiving care. Blue Cross. Blue Cross is composed of 80 separate and autonomous plans that operate in the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, and Jamaica. The benefit package. Since there are a large number of independent plans and each offers several policy options, Blue Cross offers no single or uniform set of insurance costs. Allowable costs. Since Blue Cross usually pays the hospital on a cost or cost plus basis, the issue of allowable and excluded costs is of considerable importance. Chapter 2.33: Financing Hospital Costs. As noted earlier, the costs of the care frequently are financed jointly by Blue Cross and the insured patient. Methods of payment. The process by which the hospital receives reimbursement for services to an insured member begins with a submission of the subscriber's bill to Blue Cross. The commercial insurance industry. After Blue Cross, a second major source of hospital revenue is the commercial insurance company. Unlike Blue Cross, the commercial insurance company is operated to earn a profit. As a result, most companies offer benefit packages that limit their financial liability to defined dollar indemnities that are paid when certain accommodations and certain services are used by the insured person. The benefit structure. The range of benefits offered by the commercial insurance industry includes hospital, maternity, surgical, obstetrical, OBSTETRICL, obstetrical, and in-hospital Medicare. 2.42. Financing care under commercial insurance. As in the case of Blue Cross, the cost of the care used by the commercially insured patient are financed jointly by the insurance company and the insured individual. Methods of payment. There essentially are two methods by which a hospital can obtain payment for services insured under a commercial policy. First, the hospital can seek payment for the entire bill from the insured patients. This process is initiated by the hospital submitting a bill to the patient, who in turn submits a claim to the insurance carrier. In the second method, rather than rely on the insured to remit insurance payments to the institution, management should require the patient to execute an assignment that authorizes the carrier to pay benefits directly to the hospital. Medicare. Medicare. On July 1st, 1966, Titles 18 and 19 of the Social Security Act became effective. July 1st, 1966, title of the 18th and 19th of the Social Security Act became effective. Known more generally as Medicare and Medicaid, these amendments of the Social Security Act ushered in an area in which governmental authorities have played an increasingly important role in financing costs of health and hospital care to identifiable segments of the American population. Medicare is a federally sponsored program designed to pay for health services used by persons aged 65 and over. Part A of the Medicare legislation is insurance for hospital care and related services, while Part B, which is called supplementary medical insurance, is designed to help pay for physician care. Since the primary objective here is to describe the financial environment of the hospital, only the provisions pertaining to Part A of Title are addressed in this section. Benefit structure. Financing Medicare benefits. Allowable costs, amount and receipt of Medicare payments. And here we have oh, a graph. For example, for X-rays, here we have other concrete numbers. For example, for services, pharmacy, laboratory, and XYZ others. Medicaid, as mentioned, Title 19 of the Social Security Act, more generally known as Medicaid, became effective July 1st, 1966. Medicaid is a program intended to assist in financing the cost of care for medically indigent patients. Here, medical indigency refers to patients who are unable to pay for medical care even though they can finance other normal expenses. Here, medical indigency refers to patients who are unable to pay for medical care even though they can finance other normal living expenses. Here, medical indigency refers to patients who are unable to pay for medical care even though they can finance other normal living expenses. Here, medical indigency refers to patients who are unable to pay for medical care even though they can finance other normal living expenses. With regard to the benefit structure, it is important to note that Medicaid is a state-directed program and, as a consequence, definition of medical indigency as well as the extent and scope of benefits vary from state to state. Some states have minimal benefits, while others offer a more comprehensive range of services. However, inpatient, outpatient, physician, and skilled nursing services, as well as certain laboratory tests, are basic to the Medicaid program. Hospital charges for Medicaid usually are cost-based in a manner similar to Medicare reimbursement. Medicaid claims usually are processed through the State Department of Health, Department of Social Services, or some other intermediary. In most cases, the recipient does not share in financing the cost of care. In addition to financing the cost of care to Medicaid recipients, states can use funds to pay the deductible and coinsurance charges under Part A of Title 18. Usually the institution must exhaust all reasonable means of collecting receivables from the beneficiary before relying on Medicaid for payment. When viewed from the perspective of the institution, there can be little doubt that the Medicaid program has reduced the magnitude of unmet costs as well as the number and value of receivables that must be written off as uncollectible. Clearly, the payment of hospital charges of the medically indigent as well as the deductibles and coinsurance charges associated with Part A of Title 18 have improved the financial solvency of hospitals that provide a large number of care to the poor and aged. Financing hospital care in Canada, where I am, of course, in Hawk Island, also known as Montreal. Yours truly, Adrian h.a.dragan, your brother, your sister, your brosis. Financing hospital care in Canada. Objectives. After completing this chapter, you should be able to 1. Describe the inpatient and outpatient services in Canada. 2. Describe the other sources of revenue earned by the Canadian hospital. 3. Describe costs that are recoverable by the Canadian hospital. 4. Describe the method of determining the federal contribution to the health programs of the provincial government. 5. Describe the methods employed to finance the provincial share of health costs. Describe the methods used by provincial authorities to pay participating hospitals. Introduction. In Canada,